We are back with season 3 of Staying in My Lane podcast, and we've discussed a lot of different things in the first 2 seasons. We left off hearing Kara's story, talking to her a little bit more in depth about things, and now we are shifting into season 3, where I'm going to be bringing more guests on the podcast, talking about more topics and kind of diving into something that I've been going through myself lately with my twin pregnancy, and something that I had no idea was even a thing until about a month ago. So let's get started. I had no idea that liver function was so affected during pregnancy, and I have a diagnosis of cholestasis. I don't know how many people know about that, but that's something that I've never heard of, and I've had 3 healthy pregnancies, and it has kind of changed the trajectory of my life for the short term. And pregnancy itself is hard in general, and it has a way of exposing everything that you've learned about strength, independence, and even staying silent when there's pain or, fear of the unknown. And for me, silence has always felt safer than asking for help. So that's something that I've kind of had to adapt to, being able to ask for that support or that help when I feel like I desperately need it because I'm exhausted, I'm in pain, not only from a twin pregnancy, but from the cholestasis and also having high blood pressure and swelling and just everything. It's a lot. This episode is not just about pregnancy complications, it's about what happens when you're used to carrying everything by yourself because you're too stubborn to ask for help. And pregnancy kind of humbles you and asks you to carry on more, but forces you to ask for that help. Because the truth is that you can't do it alone. And I am someone who I like to do things by myself. I like to take on responsibilities and tasks by myself because I'm very independent, hyper independent, and I like things done my way. I'm very particular, not controlling. I'm just very OCD on certain things. So for me, asking for that help, having to readjust my lifestyle or readjust when I'm cleaning because I'm a clean freak, I clean all the time. That's been a hard adjustment for me. And having pain is not something I'm used to. So being in pain constantly and also being physically sick constantly has taken a toll on my not only physical health, but my mental and emotional health as well. One thing that I've learned through this whole process is that pregnancy has not stopped my responsibility. It didn't pause my responsibility that I have in my everyday life. I'm a full time working mom of 3. I am a wife to a man who is in law enforcement. So there's a lot of late nights, early mornings, holidays by myself, things like that, because of his sacrifice and his hard work that he puts on for our family and takes care of us. Before hospitals, before the diagnosis that I have, before the ambulance trips, I just thought that my pregnancy was going to be fine. I was confident in the fact that the last time I had sat down with my doctor after switching OB care because I wasn't feeling heard, I was being made to feel dramatic for my symptoms, which now I know is not true. Um, my OB looked at me and said, things are pretty boring right now, so we'll just kind of keep monitoring you and have you come in monthly up until then it switches to every 2 weeks. And shortly after that appointment, I think it was about 3 days, I started experiencing horrible, horrible itching, horrible, horrible nausea, vomiting, horrible pain that I just had never experienced before. I chalked it up to be twin pregnancy. My last pregnancy, I'm 35, so technically they consider that geriatric. But I had no idea that, the severe itching that I had that I thought was just dry skin would turn into something where the twins would have to be delivered 1 month early due to my liver function and the protection of my life and their lives. My pregnancy went from being super normal to alarms going off before the sun came up so I could drive an hour and a half to see my OB, me getting dressed quietly so I wouldn't wake my kids, packing lunches, checking backpacks, making sure everyone was okay before I even checked in with myself, and then getting into my car, driving the long distances, sometimes in snow, sometimes in freezing weather, And I ended up having to drive down to the OB triage emergency room and have them check me out, which I ended up staying the entire night, overnight, being admitted into one of their rooms because I was having severe symptoms. And I drove, I think it was like 9:30 at night. I had to drive, and I do not like driving at night anyways. So being pregnant with twins and feeling sick and throwing up the whole way only magnified my situation. That's where it first started with the pain, the itching, the horrible cramping of like the right upper part of my stomach. The itching started and it was subtle at first, but then it turned into some more severe itching, almost like within, I would say, overnight. The exhaustion became a little bit more intense. I was having some blurred vision, which is linked to my high blood pressure. I've had preeclampsia, which is the high blood pressure in pregnancy. I've had that twice in two other pregnancies. So that's something that I'm used to. However, the liver function is something I've never heard of before. Again, the diagnosis is cholestasis. There is acute liver failure as well, which is part of that. Does not mean your liver is going to fail after pregnancy. This cholestasis diagnosis is specific to pregnancy. It only is a pregnancy condition. It goes away after delivery. So that's a great sigh of relief for me. But there's a lot of complications that I've experienced in this pregnancy that I've not experienced before. And that night that I went down to the hospital where I was staying overnight, they ran blood tests. Things came back elevated. The ALT and the AST, which are specific to liver function, were very high, along with my bile acids, which were also high. So let's get into what cholestasis is. What are the symptoms of it and what does it mean? Cholestasis of pregnancy, often referred to as ICP, is a liver condition that occurs only during pregnancy. Like I said before, it's pregnancy specific. It happens when the normal flow of bile from your liver stops or slows down, causing bile acids to build up in the blood. Bile is not supposed to be in the blood, which is what causes the itching. I told my husband that it feels to me like fire ants are under my skin, and I cannot get any relief that will help it go away. Which, looking back now, is why I was rubbing my feet on the floor at night to try to get the itch on the bottoms of my feet to go away. This most commonly occurs and appears in the third trimester. However, it can start earlier, especially in twin pregnancies, but it does resolve after delivery, which is, again, that sigh of relief that things will go back to normal because I could not imagine having this for the rest of my life. The exact cause of why this happens is not fully known, but it's linked to pregnancy hormones, especially the estrogen and progesterone, genetics, impaired bile transport in liver cells, and higher hormone levels that are in the multiple gestation pregnancies, more than a singleton. Common symptoms include things like the severe itching. It's often worse at night, more intense, and there's no rash with this, which is why I thought it was weird and I thought it was just dry skin, is because there wasn't a rash. I didn't have hives. I didn't have anything like that. So for me, I was thinking I was being dramatic or I needed lotion and literally would oil myself up all the time. I still do, and it does nothing to relieve that. Nausea, vomiting, right upper abdominal discomfort, and in some cases, jaundice, which is the yellowing of the skin and eyes, which I'm going to get to right now. So, the first person who truly saw the jaundice part was my mother in law. She looked at me when she walked in our house. I asked her to come over and help me fold laundry. And there's that asking for help piece that I was talking about because I woke up that morning and I felt like I was going to die. I don't mean to even be dramatic. It was so uncomfortable. I felt so exhausted mentally, physically, emotionally. And she looked at me when she walked in the door and was like, "Your skin is yellow. Your eyes look a little yellow as well." At first, I kind of brushed it off because I was like, probably just the lighting or whatever, you know? But I told her I didn't feel well. Denial always feels safer than confirmation, right? We don't want to admit that something's wrong or something could be wrong because we're scared of that unknown. She was right. The yellow was not exhaustion. It wasn't the lighting in the room. It was jaundice. My liver was struggling at that point. And that realization changed everything. So I did call my doctor. They sent me down to my OB that I switched to, thank goodness, which was an hour and a half away. They are the ones that caught this. I switched OB care because I felt like I wasn't being taken serious. I know I said that previously, but switching to this doctor is the one that caught it. And they sent me an hour and a half down there to be monitored. I ended up being there for a while, and my liver enzymes were going up. My bile acids were going up. And why this matters is because there are a lot of maternal risks with cholestasis, extreme discomfort and sleep deprivation, which I felt both of those symptoms. Increased risk of postpartum hemorrhage, which is uncommon. Hopefully, that's not something I experience. I've experienced a hemorrhage in my last pregnancy where nurses and doctors ran in. I was bleeding a lot. I was in a lot of pain. I really don't remember. It was kind of a blur, but my husband, thank God he was there, was super supportive and was able to help me with that right away. But the symptoms of, we talked about the symptoms of this diagnosis. They usually resolve after birth, sometimes within hours and days. My high risk doctor, I went from having one OB to having now a team of doctors of 8 different OBs. 2 of them are high risk doctors. But the fetal risks with the cholestasis, which is why they bumped up my delivery, is because the preterm birth can be spontaneous or planned, fetal distress, and meconium in the amniotic fluid. So we don't want that. There is a risk of stillbirth. However, I'm being monitored very carefully, very, very strategically. However, stillbirth really only occurs when there's higher bile acids, especially over 100, which mine are controlled and way under that now. So thankfully, my OB caught this. I am on medication to help manage it. It won't take it away. It doesn't cure it, but again, it cures itself after birth. It goes away. And one thing that my doctor had told me is the itching can start before labs even rise. So that repeat testing is common, and that's probably why it didn't show up right away in my blood tests. And my symptoms just kind of increased really quickly. Before all this happened, I was taken to the emergency room because I thought I had a blood clot in my leg, superficial, and I ended up finding out I had gallstones, which gallstones is related to this because of the bile flow. But again, these medications are helping to manage my symptoms during the last month of my pregnancy. The monitoring during pregnancy has been regular bile acid and liver enzyme checks, increased fetal surveillance, those NST tests, and close coordination with the high risk doctors. Again, I have a team of like 8 doctors now. So the typical recommendations for delivery, they vary by severity. Mild is 36 to 37, moderate is 35 to 36. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And severe is sometimes way earlier, depending on what they find. And in twin pregnancies, they often require earlier delivery considerations due to the higher risk, which is why I'm around that 35, 36 anyways, but we do have my C-section scheduled. I've only ever had C-sections, and for me, that's a preference that I really enjoy. I don't want to do a vaginal delivery. I've never wanted to do that. So I opted for a C-section with my first because he was breech, followed that with my second because she was transverse, and followed that with my third because obviously the risks of hemorrhaging go up the more pregnancies that you have. My plan now is to continue going for 1 to 2 times a week check-ins with my doctor for the last month if I make it that far, and having the regular testing. It's so important to have education and knowledge on this diagnosis because again, this is something I knew nothing about. I'd never heard of this. I just thought my hands were dry, and thank God that my doctor noticed because this is something that can be, a very threatening condition if not taken care of or diagnosed. At the beginning of this episode, we talked about asking for help. And the more and more that I kind of go along in my pregnancy, the more that I've matured, as a 35-year-old mom, the more that I've kind of been more self aware and in tune with my emotions and my feelings, the more I realize that pregnancy support really does matter. Support comes from things like family, friends, medical providers. It's not a luxury, it's the difference between coping and collapsing. I've pushed away a lot of help. I like to say I can do things by myself, which mostly I can, but I'm embarrassed to ask for help. That might come as a surprise because with my second pregnancy, my daughter, I was going through a divorce at the time. I had filed for divorce. I was done. I lived in my car after my baby was born with a 3-year-old and a newborn. I do not recommend that in the middle of winter. do not do that. I was too embarrassed to tell anybody, so I just did it by myself. I showered in random places. I brushed my teeth in bathrooms and the public bathrooms. I, stayed in my van, had my phone, just kind of did all the things by myself that I probably would never recommend to anyone else. But I did that, and I think that created a hyper independence where there's more of a fear or an embarrassment that comes along with asking for help, because in that moment I did what I had to in order to survive in a safe situation and keep my babies safe until I could go back to my parents' house. But now I realize that I'm in a different place in my life. I have that support, the belief, consistency from people in my life, presence, help without judgment, and I'm slowly learning that I need to accept it. Again, this isn't my first pregnancy. It's important to say my previous pregnancies, I did struggle to ask for that help. And in my third pregnancy with my daughter, I ended up with postpartum depression that turned into postpartum psychosis. That's not something that's talked about a lot, but I hid it from everybody because, again, I'm scared to ask for that help, that support. I was embarrassed. And I think I've realized the more that I've been in therapy is there is a lot of shame as a primary emotion, or a primary feeling, I should say, maybe that's a better word for it, around certain conversations or certain topics or certain experiences per se. And postpartum is not something that's talked about in the open, right? It's a shameful conversation. It's something that not everybody can relate to. And there's a part of motherhood that rarely gets spoken about, and that is postpartum. It's a mental health struggle that doesn't fit the perfect picture that we're sold for when our babies come home, right? We are told to enjoy every moment and rest when the baby rests and take advantage of the time at home and all of these things, but we're not necessarily educated on how to ask for that help without that feeling of judgment or shame. And, you can do all of the surveys that they give you in the doctor's office. Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling suicidal? Are you feeling all of these things? I think they usually do the PHQ-9 assessment with most mothers. I've had to do it a couple times in my appointments now. And, postpartum is real. The depression, postpartum psychosis, that can be rare, but it is real. I've had that. And I don't want to scare anyone or make anybody uncomfortable, but this is meant to inform and normalize and protect the conversation around this topic because, face it, silence has never saved anyone. Postpartum is not just a recovery period, it's a neurological, hormonal, emotional, and identity level shift in a mother's life. Within hours of birth, hormones drop dramatically. Mine dropped to zero. Sleep deprivation begins immediately. The nervous system is overwhelmed. So you kind of go into that fight or flight mode. Responsibility is obviously increased within seconds of delivery, and your brain and body are recalibrating while you're being asked to care for someone else around the clock. You have nurses coming in to constantly check your blood pressure and tell you how to do things. And that alone is enough to destabilize even the most healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy person. So when someone struggles with postpartum, the question should never be what's wrong with them or why would you do that? Or why are you acting like that? It should be what support is missing from this person's life? What can I do to help the mom take some of that load off of her back to help her feel more cared about, to help her feel more regulated? Postpartum depression is deeper, it's longer, heavier, and it doesn't always look like sadness. Postpartum can actually look like persistent sadness or emptiness, intense guilt or shame, feeling disconnected from the baby, irritability or rage, loss of interest in things that once made you happy, feeling like you're failing even when you're not, intrusive thoughts that don't align with who you are, feeling numb instead of emotional, difficulty sleeping even when the baby sleeps. And one of the most painful symptoms, I think, is feeling like everyone else is doing better than you or constantly comparing yourself to other moms, which can be really easy in 2025, 2026 because social media makes it look like it's perfection, and it's not. Many mothers hide postpartum depression, like I did, because they're afraid of being judged. They fear that they're being seen as ungrateful. They worry that someone will question their ability to parent. They don't recognize what they're experiencing is depression. So they smile, they function, they show up every day, and they suffer quietly without asking for help, not because they don't want the help, but because they don't feel safe enough asking for it. And I, for one, threw myself into working out, eating healthy. I wanted to just focus on getting my body back because I thought that that's what would completely fix it and make me feel 100% better back in my normal state. But it actually took me a couple years later where I had to reset and regulate my hormones back to where they needed to be because I went into postpartum psychosis during my recovery of my third child. Postpartum psychosis is a severe mental health condition that typically begins suddenly, occurs within weeks to days after birth, and kind of involves that break from reality. It's often linked to those extreme hormonal shifts, which again, pregnancy causes your hormones to drastically drop after birth. So that makes sense. A personal or family history of bipolar disorder or psychosis can increase your chances of having postpartum psychosis, but for me, I did not have any of that history. I don't have those diagnoses. However, I can kind of link it back to the fact that I was going through a lot with my ex-husband who I shared custody with at the time. He's now terminated from seeing my children. And so I think a lot of that trauma and that anxiety carried over into that portion of my healing from my third pregnancy. Even though I had a new husband and he's been so supportive, he's so amazing, and he's so there for me, I was constantly worried when my older two would go to my ex-husband's house because obviously there was some abuse there, which we found out later. But it really took a toll on me mentally and emotionally. And I think I just kind of lost it for a while, which I'm okay with admitting this now, but it's really hard to reflect back on that because I wish I would have handled that situation differently. This can happen to people who don't have any prior mental health history at all. Symptoms of the postpartum psychosis may include delusions or false beliefs, hallucinations, severe confusion, paranoia. I had paranoia. I had rapid mood swings, disorganized thinking, feeling detached from reality, or believing that the baby is in danger when they're not. And these symptoms can be terrifying, especially for the person experiencing them, which in the moment I was terrified. However, again, in the moment, I did not want to ask for help because these things come with intense shame most of the time. And it's just hard to ask for that help, to be honest. Mothers experiencing postpartum psychosis are far more likely to be afraid of themselves than want to cause harm to anyone else. They need immediate care, not judgment, not silence, not anything like that, right? Again, it's very, very hard to ask for that help. It's very hard to admit that you are more afraid of hurting yourself than you are anyone else. It's definitely a delusional detachment from reality. And shame is one of the most dangerous parts of that postpartum mental condition. Shame tells us that we should be happier. We are failing. You can't tell anyone because it'll make you look bad. Shame is one of those emotions or feelings that isolates, and isolation makes symptoms worse. When we don't talk about postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, postpartum care, women suffer alone, and we suffer longer than necessary if we just would talk about it or ask for the help. And this is why that support matters so much. And this is why I'm starting to really realize now that asking for that help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength because I'm able to realize that I'm not able to do everything on my own all the time. Postpartum mental health outcomes are deeply influenced by partner support, family support, community support, or medical follow ups and support. Support means someone checking in repeatedly, someone believing you the first time when you feel like you're failing or you feel like something's not right, right? Someone helping without waiting to be asked, someone noticing when something feels off. Support is not an optional part of postpartum, and I'm really realizing that. It's a protective part of postpartum. And something that I wish I would have accepted sooner is getting help or asking for that help is not a sign of failure. Treatment works, whether it's hormonal stabilization, therapy, sleep protection, medication, inpatient care when necessary. Mine never got that bad, but needing treatment does not mean you're broken. It means that your brain needs support and it needs to heal back to where it was prior to pregnancy. If you are postpartum, if you're pregnant, if you're expecting to be pregnant and something feels wrong, Remember that you're not weak, you're not dangerous, you're not alone. You deserve to have the help and ask for help before things reach a breaking point. Do not take advice from me and just do everything on your own. If you're supporting someone with postpartum, take those changes seriously. Trust your instincts and don't minimize or wait to ask them for help. Postpartum is serious. It's a mental condition that does not mean that it's a failure of motherhood. It's a health condition in a season of immense vulnerability and change. And talking about it does not create harm, it creates education, it creates openness. Silence creates the harm and the shame, which again are not necessary and are not something that needs to stay where it's at. We're going into 2026. We need to be talking more about how to care for mothers and realize that the load that they are carrying before, during, and after birth are so heavy because their bodies change. Our bodies are meant to change and go through that, but it's a heavy change and it creates a lot of fear of the unknown or the ability to not predict what's coming, which change is scary. Not having a solid plan or knowing what to expect is scary. So we need to be asking for help. We need to be helping each other. We need to be talking about these things. And, from cholestasis diagnosis to postpartum to having a plan, all of these things are important in education, informative information, conversation pieces, knowing what to expect without kind of knowing what to expect, if that makes sense, because we cannot predict how things are going to go. Every pregnancy is different, every recovery is different, but it is really important to have a plan and have that support lined up, even if you don't want to, just in case you need it. Moving along, we plan constantly. We prepare endlessly for birth, delivery, the hospital bag, the car seat, birth plan, everything. And then once the baby, or in my case, babies, are here, the focus shifts entirely to you made it, you should be grateful, now push through. But again, we don't talk about that postpartum period enough to where moms feel comfortable. It's the aftermath. What happens to your body after pregnancy matters deeply, not just for weeks, but for years. From a functional and holistic perspective, postpartum is a major psychological recovery. That pregnancy depletes nutrition, stresses your organs, alters hormones, challenges the nervous system, and shifts your metabolism. So you don't simply bounce back from that very quickly. Your body has lost minerals, shifted blood volume, altered liver function, in my case, the cholestasis, and your body experiences extremely high inflammatory stress during pregnancy. So healing doesn't just happen automatically because the baby gets here. Even after delivery, your body is still rebalancing those hormones, healing tissues, and replenishing those nutrients, regulating your blood sugars, your blood pressure, and managing the inflammation. From a holistic perspective, your postpartum recovery is that rebuilding phase. And if that rebuilding phase is rushed or ignored, symptoms show up later, not because your body failed, but because it never fully recovered. Things like liver overload, adrenal exhaustion, blood sugar instability, mineral depletion, gut disruption, and nervous system dysregulation. When these things are not addressed, postpartum struggles don't just disappear, they evolve. One of the biggest misunderstandings is separating mental health from physical health. And from a holistic perspective, mood is chemistry. Anxiety is often nervous system overload, and depression can reflect nutrient depletion, inflammation, or hormone disruption. Specifically, the role of the liver after pregnancy. The liver plays an important, massive role in postpartum. It helps clear pregnancy hormones, process stress hormones, regulate bile flow, support digestion, balance blood sugar. So, when that liver is overwhelmed, which is common after pregnancy, people may experience fatigue, brain fog, mood swings, digestive issues, or skin changes. From a holistic perspective, we ask, how do we support the liver instead of overloading it further? Nervous system regulation is foundational. So, for pregnancy and birth, those are stress events. So, when they are happening, your nervous system is in that fight, flight, or freeze. Postpartum healing requires downshifting, reducing overstimulation, creating that predictability, supporting sleep rhythms, limiting emotional drain, and protecting your energy. Healing cannot happen in constant survival mode. Again, rest and support is important. In functional health, rest is not optional. It allows hormone recalibration, nervous system repair, immune balance, and tissue healing. That chronic exhaustion is not a flex, it's not a badge of honor. It's a warning sign that your body is needing you to slow down. So pushing through is kind of delaying that healing. Nutrition after pregnancy is not about weight. It's about replenishment, repair, and stabilization. Key needs often includes protein for tissue healing, minerals for nervous system support, healthy fats for hormones, and gentle carbs for blood sugar balance. Undereating in postpartum, intentionally or unintentionally, worsens fatigue, mood, and recovery. I noticed that I did that in my last pregnancy, so I'm trying to do things differently. Again, we tie this all back into support, rest, and healing. From a functional perspective, postpartum is that window of opportunity. With support, nourishment, rest, the body can rebuild stronger, stabilize faster, and the mind can soften. But when we ignore that, the body compensates until it can't anymore, which comes with that postpartum, where it's important to ask for that help. Health after pregnancy matters because pregnancy doesn't end at birth. It echoes through the body, the nervous system, and years that follow. If you're postpartum, whether it's weeks, months, or years out, and you feel off, depleted, or not yourself, which you probably will, because as women, our bodies are meant to go through changes mentally, emotionally, physically, psychologically. But if you are postpartum, your body is not broken, it's asking to be supported. You deserve that care without shame, without judgment. So, I hope that this episode was kind of informative and educational because it's something that I think is important going through this season of my life right now where I am pregnant with twins, going through this cholestasis diagnosis, having to be on medications every single day, having to kind of balance and prepare faster than I thought I would have to. It's a lot to handle, and I don't want other moms or other women who are going to be going through pregnancy to feel like they're alone. I have felt like that in my previous pregnancies, and I just really wanted to share some information. So, with that being said, we have a lot more topics, conversations, and guests coming on the podcast. And this is going to be the opportunity to dive into a lot more information and research about things like mold toxicity. I have a guest coming on who is going to talk about her experience and what she has learned, which is, I think, incredible. We're going to talk positive self talk, friendships ending, when to let go, when to not let go, growth, healing, motherhood, everything, marriage. There's a lot more coming. So, with that being said, I'm excited to be back, and I will see you later.